All right, welcome everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here for this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating topic. We're going to look at how one of the world's most famous monster hunts completely transformed into this profound story about culture, genetics, and modern conservation. So if you're ready for a focused, really eye-opening journey up into the highest peaks on Earth, you are in the exact right place. Let's get started.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Have you ever actually stopped to wonder what happens when an ancient legend collides head-on with modern science? Because the Yeti is far more than just a simple biological cryptid, and it's definitely more than just a scary campfire story. It's a mystery that sits right at the intersection of anthropology, extreme geography, human psychology, and cutting-edge zoology. What we're really looking for might not be a literal monster at all, but rather a kind of ghost of the mountains that actually has a whole lot to teach us. Section 1. The Enduring Mountain Mystery. Picture the colossal folds of the Himalayan mountain range. It is, without a doubt, the highest, harshest, and most forbidding landscape on the planet. And for centuries, this majestic, almost entirely inaccessible geography has served as the ultimate backdrop for humanity's most persistent mystery. Now, if there's one single piece of evidence that catapulted this from a quirky regional curiosity to a full-blown global obsession, it was found right there in the snow. Back in November 1951, a highly respected, super methodical British mountaineer named Eric Shipton was traversing the Menlem Glacier, and he captured a photograph of a colossal, clearly defined footprint in the fresh snow. This track was roughly 33 centimeters long and 45 centimeters wide. I mean, that's over 17 inches across. Shipton placed his ice axe right next to it just to give you a sense of scale. You can totally imagine the visceral thrill of looking at that photo for the first time. It literally ignited a media frenzy. People quickly realized this track didn't match a bear, it didn't match a snow leopard, or really any known primate. And that sparked an obsession that hasn't entirely faded, even 7 decades later. But how exactly did we get the name we use in the West? Well, in 1921, a British expedition led by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Howard Berry stumbled across some mysterious tracks. The local Sherpas called the creature that left them the Meto Kongmi, which translates roughly to man-bear snowman or even filthy snowman. However, a journalist named Henry Newman was reporting on the expedition, and he essentially mistranslated that indigenous term for his English-reading public. By complete accident, he birthed the terrifying, heavily sensationalized moniker we all know today, the Abominable Snowman.
Section 2. Sacred Roots and Misunderstood Monsters. And this brilliantly illustrates a huge divide. To really understand the Yeti, we have to pivot back in time, way before any Western explorer or journalist ever showed up with their cameras and ice axes. The Western view, of course, paints the Yeti as a fearsome, abominable beast, right? It's a trophy to be hunted down or captured. But the indigenous view is entirely different. For centuries, the Sherpa and Tibetan Buddhist communities have understood the Yeti, which they call Yekte or Migo, as a deeply spiritual being. It's seen as a karmic manifestation, a guardian of these sacred valleys, and a wild man that genuinely demands respect. It serves as a reminder that nature has its own intelligence, and that human hubris should really be checked at the edge of the wilderness.
You see, this spiritual connection goes back a long way. The Mani Boom, which is a really important 11th century Tibetan sacred text, recounts a cosmological myth where humans and Yetis actually share the exact same mythological progenitor, an incarnation of the Bodhisattva of compassion. So in traditional Himalayan thinking, the Yeti isn't just an animal, it's almost like a cousin. It embodies this dual nature of compassion and wrathful power, meaning it demands deep reverence from us rather than fear. Section 3. The Golden Age of Expeditions. It's wild to think about what happened when that deep, ancient, local folklore collided head-on with frantic Western adventurism in the 20th century. Things escalated incredibly fast. In 1832, Brian Hodgson recorded the very first Western account, which was based on his porter's stories. Fast forward a bit to 1921, and the Abominable Snowman name drops. In 1925, an educated, scientifically trained photographer named Anne Tumbazi actually reported seeing a bipedal creature pulling at bushes out in the snow. Then, of course, comes Shipton's iconic 1951 photo, which basically kicked off the golden age of monster hunting. By 1960, Edmund Hillary, the guy who first conquered Everest, led a massive 10-month scientific expedition specifically to solve this mystery. By that point, the creature was fully cemented in global pop culture.
But you gotta ask yourself, why did so many highly credible mountaineers, like the famous Don Willens in 1970, claim they saw monsters? Well, psychology plays a massive role here. Humans have this cognitive trait called hyperactive agency detection. Basically, it's our brain's tendency to detect a pattern or a living agent in ambiguous stimuli. When you're up at extreme altitude, you're exhausted, you're in the middle of a whiteout snowstorm, and suddenly you see a dark shape moving in the distance, your brain is hardwired to instantly interpret that as a living, breathing, potentially dangerous creature.
So, the crucial point is that the extreme Himalayan environment itself literally creates illusions. Take footprints, for example. What starts out as a small set of tracks from a regular red fox or a bear can radically transform over a few hours. The melting sun and the freezing winds cause a documented phenomenon known as snow distortion, which expands those small tracks into massive, seemingly bipedal footprints. Suddenly, a totally normal animal's trail looks exactly like the path of an ancient giant. Section 4, DNA and the hard science. All right, so as we entered the modern laboratory era, geneticists decided to bypass all the optical illusions and try to solve the mystery using hard biological data. For decades, explorers had been collecting physical relics from remote monasteries. But when science finally tested them, the reality was pretty sobering. The famous Yeti scalp from the Kunchung Monastery, it was actually fashioned from the skin of a Himalayan serow, which is a type of goat antelope. Hair samples consistently turned out to belong to horses, dogs, or known bears. And the legendary Pambuche hand? Get this, Hollywood actor James Stewart famously smuggled a finger from that hand into London inside his luggage. But when it was finally analyzed, it turned out to be human bone. Since the physical relics were kind of a bust, scientists proposed a few different hypotheses to explain the sightings. Could it be a relic population of the extinct giant ape, Gigantopithecus? Or maybe surviving Denisovans, an ancient human relative? I mean, those are fascinating ideas for sure, but the harsh truth is that the fossil record in the Himalayas just doesn't support them at all. Zero bones or bodies of these species have ever been found in the region. So the leading scientific theories pointed squarely toward rare, local bears or just straightforward misidentification. But then, and this is a huge scientific plot twist, in 2014, Oxford geneticist Brian Sykes analyzed some hair samples and found a match using short DNA fragments to a 40,000-year-old polar bear. No way, right? For a moment, it really seemed like the Yeti was a surviving prehistoric bear. However, in 2017, evolutionary biologist Charlotte Lindquist published a far more rigorous, definitive reality check. By mapping the full mitochondrial genomes of alleged Yeti samples, she proved definitively that they belonged to local Asian black bears and Tibetan brown bears. Now, what's really interesting about this is the striking finality to these findings. As Lindquist herself concluded, the biological underpinnings of the Yeti legend can absolutely be found in local bears. Mainstream zoology now firmly believes that these elusive, shaggy, and occasionally bipedal walking bears are the true identity of the cryptid. When a Himalayan brown bear stands up on its hind legs in the middle of a snowstorm, it looks exactly like the monster we've been searching for. Section 5. From myth to conservation. Let's move on and see how this builds into something truly heartwarming, a pivot from the scientific death of a monster to the birth of a modern conservation movement. Because today, scientists are utilizing the eDNA revolution. Animals shed DNA constantly through hair and skin cells, right? So today, researchers don't actually need to capture a bear to know it's there. They simply scoop up trace snow, water, or soil samples from areas with reported Yeti activity. They sequence that environmental genetic material, and they map the precise range of these incredibly rare bears without ever having to disturb them. And here is the absolute most beautiful irony of the whole shebang. The Yeti has become one of our greatest conservation allies. The immense cultural power of the Yeti legend is actively driving global ecotourism and bringing vital funding directly to the region. It's raising critical awareness for the endangered Himalayan brown bear and the Tibetan blue bear, whose habitats are shrinking super fast due to climate change. It even inspired the creation of Bhutan's Saktang Wildlife Sanctuary. That actually makes Bhutan the only country in the world with an official sanctuary originally intended, at least in part, to protect the habitat of a cryptid. How cool is that? So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought. We may have scientifically solved the Yeti mystery. We've proven the monster is a bear, and we're actively using that knowledge to save those very bears. But psychologically, the Yeti just refuses to die. It occupies a space in the human imagination that no newly discovered animal can ever really fill. In a world completely mapped by satellites, fully documented and hyperconnected, what do we lose when no mysteries remain? Perhaps we actually need the Yeti,
not as a biological fact, but as a reminder of our deep, unyielding desire for an untamed, unconquered natural world. Thank you so much for joining me today, and as always, stay curious.